This podcast is an affiliate of BCW Supplies. The next time you need to restock on comic book bags, boards, boxes, and more, be sure to use promo code FSP to save 10% on your order. That's FSP for Flat Squirrel Productions. It helps support the show, too. This podcast is made possible by the support of our Patreon community. Sign up for a monthly or annual membership at patreon.com/Anthony Desiato and choose from a range of rewards. This week, I want to spotlight our Daily Planet Bullpen tier, available for $1 a month or $10 for the year. Members at this level are the first to know about upcoming coverage and get to submit a comment or question to be read during the episode. Sign up today, and thank you to all patrons. In the 1950s, George Reeves embodied the Man of Steel in Superman's first television adaptation. From its gritty black and white beginnings to the kid-friendly color years, to this day, an entire generation reveres George as their Superman, while for others, the show remains an overlooked chapter in the character's mythology. On this podcast, we bring everyone together as we break down each episode of Adventures of Superman. Welcome to another exciting episode in the Adventures of Superman. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. Joining me to discuss Season 2, Episode 10, The Face and the Voice, is returning guest Rich Roney. Welcome.
Hello. Thanks. As always, thanks for having me. I'm so excited about this.
Yes, as am I. Let me ask you the question I've been asking all of our guests as we've been getting into these Season 2 episodes. We've talked a lot about how there are these distinct eras and iterations of the show, the grim and gritty first season, the lighter, softer second season, but still black and white, still somewhat in the vein of the first season to an extent, and then the much more kid-friendly color years. Just kind of curious, your ideal preferred version of the show and just kind of how you're feeling about Season 2 generally.
Oh, that's a marvelous question. So as a child, I grew up with seasons 4 through 6. I mean, when I was, as a child, from like ages 5 to maybe 10, I saw all the ones that had been filmed in color. That's what I grew up with. You opened the door to me for season 1, more of the crime, the noir sort of thing. And then season 2. I'm more partial to seasons 1 and 2, but it's such a subtle, I mean, more of the stories in season 1 I enjoy immensely. But there's two stories in season 2 that just captivate me immensely. The one we're going to discuss is one of them.
Excellent. So kind of on that note, I don't want to bury the lead here or spoil our ending, but this is a slam dunk 5 fedora episode for me. And the reason why I want to get out in front and say it now is, Rich, I don't know if you've been following any of our season 2 coverage, but for our audience who's been tuning in every week, we started off really strong. I was very high on 5 Minutes to Doom and even The Big Squeeze. After that, I haven't gotten as much mileage out of these season 2 episodes as I wanted to and as I hoped to. And one of the things that I've been saying over and over like a broken record is that I have to accept the fact that the show isn't built to mine the emotional lives or emotional stakes of the characters. But this episode and the one that we're going to talk about in 2 weeks, Panic in the Sky, blow that out of the water because they do just that in those episodes. And this is really important for me and for this podcast because it really helped kind of crystallize, I think, why I've been bumping up against some of these previous episodes a little bit. It's because I know what the show can do and what the show is capable of. So while yes, in most instances, it's more just about the physical danger and suspense, there are instances like this one that we're going to talk about where you really get to see this range of emotion. And I love it. This did everything for me that I wanted it to. I mean, we'll get into it, but you have Clark's frustration over this imposter Superman, his confusion and fear that he might actually be committing these crimes in his sleep, his relief when he finds out that's not the case, his urgency and overeagerness with Henderson when he's trying to figure everything out. You get so much. I love this episode. And of course, you have just kind of an all-time performance by George Reeves in 3 roles. I mean, this episode, I can't say enough good things about it. And again, this kind of, I don't know what the right phrase is, restored my faith a little bit because I was not feeling so great over these past few episodes. We had episodes like Superman in Exile, Shot in the Dark, where I liked the defeat of Superman, where they challenged Superman in new and different ways. The setups were really interesting, but I didn't feel like It really paid off in a great way. And then we had other episodes like The Dog Who Knew Superman and It Goes for Scotland Yard, where the premise just didn't really light my fire all that much. So to have that run of episodes and then to get here and just love it and have it do everything that I wanted it to, I couldn't be happier.
We can turn off the mics now because I could not have said it better. Your ideas and everything you just articulated is exactly my sentiments and my perception. I could not have said it better. And this is diluted compared to what you said, but for me, there's probably 8 or 9 season 1 episodes that really enthralled me. And I thought were really quality productions. And just like you, there was a dip. I mean, like in season 1, The Stolen Costume, The Secret of Superman, The Mind Machine, our favorite, the wrestling episode, right? So many of those things are the broken statues. There were a number that there was a tremendous quality consistency to season 1. And just like you, after the first couple, there was a dip in this. But this one and the other one that you've graciously invited me to discuss in a couple of weeks are 5 stars out of 5 stars. I mean, they are quality products. For this one, I couldn't agree more. I mean, this is one thing. Well, if I may say this, because I think it's very important to me. As a child, ages 5 through 10, I grew up with Superman on summer days in the afternoon in Chicago. But it was much more child-friendly, so they skewed it towards the later seasons where he's wearing more padding. And the stories were written for 5-year-olds or 8-year-olds. You re-energized my interest in this show, and I've come to really, really appreciate George Reeves. And I feel a great deal of sympathy because I think there were a lot of things in his life that he wasn't able to do. But I think this episode is one of the few that lets him stretch his acting muscles. And he really seems to have fun with the portrayal.
I know. He really just absolutely shines in this episode. Let's get into it. So The Face and the Voice aired on November 21st, 1953, written by Jackson Gillis, directed by George Blair. Here is my synopsis or roadmap of the episode. A criminal named Boulder undergoes plastic surgery and vocal coaching at the behest of his boss, Fairchild, to look and sound like Superman. The imposter robs a grocer and later a jewelry store, then confusingly donates what he's stolen to charity. When a photo and eyewitness, actually Fairchild's henchman, Scratchy, confirm this was the real Superman, Clark begins to worry that he's sleepwalking and consults his doctor and close friend, Tom. After Boulder visits Perry White during the day, Clark's fears are assuaged, and the real Superman stops Boulder and Fairchild from killing a kidnapped Jimmy and making off with $2 million in gold. So, as we've been saying, you're going to be back in 2 weeks for Panic in the Sky. Widely, like across the board, considered the best episode of the series. And I'm not here to undermine that, and we'll talk about it in depth in a couple of episodes. But I don't know, man. Maybe this is a little bit of a hot take. Is The Face and the Voice the actual best episode of the series?
You're killing me because I likewise had that same conclusion. I still have to watch the next one, but I watched this 3 times, and each time I became more impressed with his acting prowess. And probably the only tiny suspension of disbelief is, the Jimmy and Scratchy scene when he goes to Scratchy's apartment. Absent that, this had a nice evolution. You saw Boulder going through the voice coaching and the cosmetics. You could make an argument that Reeves is playing 5 characters. There's the crude Boulder who has the Brooklyn, they hit all the tropes. There's the Boulder after the voice coaching. There's the confident Clark. There's the very anxious Clark, which I thought that did stretch his acting muscles. And then there's Clark as Superman at the end. So I have come to really become very fond and very appreciative and admire George Reeves. This is one where I think it tapped into what he wanted to get into this business for. And I wish they could have done a few more episodes where they had a touch of the comedy, a comedic touch.
Yeah, he was phenomenal. Again, I really think he shines in this episode. And to whatever extent George Reeves had any apprehensions or mixed feelings about this role, this show, his career, to whatever extent that was the case, I hope he took a lot of pride in this performance and enjoyed the work that he did here, because it really holds up. It's so much fun. It's so wild to see him in this capacity. This is a rare instance. I don't have many notes for this episode, i.e. critiques. One of the things, we'll get to it at the very end, but it ends with Boulder apprehended and requesting to undergo another round of plastic surgery to have his original face restored. And I say to myself, oh man, they could have done something with this guy in the future.
Oh, I didn't think of that. This was one where I thought they had 2 buttons at the end, right? Because they could have ended it when he was in the hospital bed going, it takes more than a face and a voice. They could have just ended it right there. But they cut over to Clark and Jimmy on the other side of the room. So this had, to use your phraseology, 2 buttons.
Here's the thing about that. We might as well just talk about it now, since we don't have to be beholden to scene by scene specifically. What so stood out to me about that, I don't disagree with you that it does it could have stopped with, it takes more than a face and a voice to be Superman. That actually would have been a very nice note to end on. However, it's essentially a special effect, right? Because you have George Reeves as Boulder and George Reeves as Clark in the same scene. And it's not that, this is the thing that was really interesting. It's not that it just cuts to them, it pans to them. Now, clearly there's some trick photography, editing magic that's happening there to make it look like that. And look, 1950s, it doesn't look seamless, but it still looks pretty cool for the time to really, and I give them a lot of credit, because they could have very easily just cut. They could have cut, but they wanted to give you that effect of the camera panning across and this illusion that the 2 of them are in the same space. And that's really cool. I mean, I don't know. Did you ever see the movie Birdman with Michael Keaton?
No.
So the gimmick with that movie is that like the entire movie is one continuous shot with no cuts. And there were extensive sequences where they had many, many minutes that were all done in one single shot, but they literally couldn't film a 2-hour movie that way. So there's, I believe the technical term is stitching, where they stitch it together to make it look like there's no cut. So obviously whatever early version of that they did here, however they did it. And again, it does look a little abrupt, but still it was cool. Like I like that they kind of went the extra mile with that. It was cool.
I didn't realize it literally to this minute. It would have been interesting if Clark had walked over and been speaking directly to Boulder.
Yeah.
And this harkens back, what was it? Months ago, we discussed some of the Candor City stuff, where he had like 5 or 6 twins down there. So it was kind of cool to have a twin in the TV show. I was impressed with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I'm saying it. It just would have been interesting if we had Boulder retain the face and be imprisoned, but then they need him for something in the future. Like, I feel like there was some untapped potential here for a future episode.
Or Candy Myers could have sprung him out and said, you got to walk around wearing glasses and a double-breasted suit.
Well, it's like my read on him is not that he's this nefarious guy. I mean, he's not the best, but he's largely dim-witted and manipulated, right, by Fairchild. So I don't know, with a positive influence, I don't know. Maybe he could have turned over a new leaf. He could have helped Clark preserve his identity. And so I don't know. I'm just saying that the only thing I was disappointed by with this whole episode was that they kind of put that genie back in the bottle. And it's like, I could have done something with that in the future.
Anthony, haven't we seen that? I'm going to bring that up both in this episode and a couple of weeks from now. It's frustrating how many times we see a friend of Clark's or a professional where we only see them once. And the doctor, Tom, we never get his last name. He's another friend of Clark's, right? This is like the same thing with Gary Allen, with Colonel Redding, or the guy in the wrestling thing. Yep.
I know he has this extensive network of friends. He doesn't spend a lot of time with them, but when he needs them, they're there. So speaking of Dr. Tom, we'll do a quick guest star breakdown. We have Carlton Young as Fairchild. I liked him. I got to tell you, man, this character had such a good plan. Like, when you really think about it, it's a very sound plan, and he covered all of his bases, because it wasn't just the plastic surgery. It was also the vocal coaching and
stealing the record to do the
stealing the record. And then this whole idea that people won't fire because they think he's Superman, and then taking that plan a step further. I mean, we'll get into it, but essentially getting the city to back down and let this quote unquote Superman run amok. He really had all of his bases covered. I really liked this criminal.
I wish they could have had Fairchild come back, because he was the closest thing I ever saw to a Lex Luthor in this TV series. I mean, he had the refinement. He was eloquent. He was smart. He was the closest thing to Lex Luthor. I wish he could have been a recurring villain.
Oh, that's a great point. And you know what? Now that you say it, that is true. He does kind of have, out of all of the villains we've seen, he does kind of have that Lex vibe to him. I like that. We also have George Chandler as the henchman Scratchy. As with a lot of guest stars who've been on the show, very extensive IMDb resume. He had 468 credits, including 59 episodes of Lassie and 3 episodes of Adventures of Superman. Percy Helton as Hamlet, the vocal coach, who I think needed a little bit of work on his diction himself, which was a little ironic, but in any event.
And he's another character actor that was in hundreds.
Yeah. Is there something in particular that you're thinking of? Or?
I remember seeing him in Westerns, both before and after this Superman thing. So he was a character actor that you continued to do work probably throughout the 60s, 50s, 60s.
Right on. And then oddly uncredited, but Hayden Rourke as Dr. Tom, and he would go on to be Dr. Bellows on I Dream of Jeannie.
Yes.
Did you watch that growing up?
I remember watching it. Yeah, I mean,
that's fine. We talk about this from time to time. I'm not a blank slate when it comes to the classic television, but I definitely have my gap. So for me, it's always Honeymooners, Happy Days, Gilligan's Island, a little bit of Brady Bunch, a little bit of Bewitched, that kind of stuff. But I never really watched I Dream of Jeannie.
I was going to say, I read somewhere that interlude where Clark goes to see Tom, which I want to get back to.
Yeah, we're going to go scene by scene through this. Yeah.
But I heard that was not in the original script. That was an addition later on. I think I read that on one of the trivia things on IMDb, or one of the assessments done by a viewer. But apparently that was not in the original script, and it was an addition later. And that's why I don't think he's credited on the show. It's more people like yourself that go, oh, I know that guy.
Oh, thank you for bringing that up. I did not come across that. That's really fascinating. Well, I'm glad they added it, because it really helped tie a lot of this together. Yeah.
And if you also notice, Lois does not appear in this episode.
There's no Lois in this episode. No, which, I don't know. I haven't really been enjoying the season 2 take on Lois, and I don't want to sound like a jerk. I don't know how much she would have added to the proceedings in this anyway. I think it worked just fine, which is unfortunate, right? Because normally you would expect, it would have been great with Lois. I don't know. It was fine. We got some great Jimmy stuff. It's a great Perry stuff. So I was content. And we'd be remiss, our most important guest star, George Reeves as Boulder. Again, as you said, really just wearing multiple hats, different characters and different phases of characters. It was really kind of amazing. So shall we go through our scene-by-scene discussion of this? All right, cool. Creator and podcaster Perry Constantine, host of Superhero Cinephiles, has a special offer for listeners of this podcast. Visit percivalconstantine.com/DFK or click the link in the show notes. Fill out the form and then get 2 free novels and 1 free superhero short story. The novels are Vanguard, Heroes Forged, an Avengers-inspired team of superheroes, and Ronin Born, a cyberpunk superhero novel set in a futuristic, fascist Japan. The short story is Omega Knights, Fire and Lightning, a Power Rangers-inspired prequel to an upcoming serial. Take advantage of this offer today, and be sure to catch Superhero Cinephiles on all major podcast platforms. We reference the television series Smallville a lot around here, and there's one Smallville rewatch podcast that's always at the top of my queue. Always Hold On to Smallville, hosted by our pal, Zach Moore. Zach and his guests bring tremendous insight, passion, and humor as they discuss each and every episode of the series that ushered in the renaissance of superhero TV. Listen to Always Hold On to Smallville wherever you get podcasts, and keep an eye out for the other shows under the Always Hold On to banner, including Arrow, DC's Legends of Tomorrow, Superman and Lois, and Star Wars. Aw Yeah Comics celebrates and promotes everything that is wonderful about comics, toys, artwork, and the joy they bring to people. visit them in person at one of their 3 locations: Harrison, New York, aka my local comic shop, Skokie, Illinois, or Muncie, Indiana. If you have kids and have been looking for a family-friendly store, look no further. Join All Yeah for exciting events, including creator signings, how-tos, and more. Visit allyeahcomics.com and follow All Yeah on social media for more. Their name says exactly how they feel about it. Say it with me now. All Yeah. So we open on Boulder, Scratchy, and Fairchild hatching this plan. Boulder is reluctant to undergo this plastic surgery. When we first see Boulder, and of course it's George Reeves in heavy prosthetic makeup and doing a voice like, I think it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt. Yeah,
they play to 1950s tropes. I mean, both with the black suit and shirt and the white tie, the Brooklyn, they really play to the tropes.
Yes.
But Reeves pulls it off.
Yeah. The only thing, this is getting nitpicky, the nose, it looked like it's falling off.
Well, can I interrupt? You are more technically knowledgeable. How many episodes? They were a real production factory in doing these episodes. And I forget what you told me. They did like 4 in 2 weeks or something. I forget what the statistics.
Yeah, something like that. And it was basically about like a handful of episodes that they would do at a time in these blocks. And so again, as we've talked about many times, right, they would do all the Perry White scenes in a day and, and all the scenes in Clark's apartment in a day. So they were juggling multiple episodes at a time. And I think it was typically about like a handful or so. So yeah, there was a lot going. Yeah, so on top, it's not only what the work that he's doing, for this, but on top of scenes for other episodes and whatnot. But yeah, so the makeup maybe could have used another pass, but it's the sort of thing I could imagine a kid watching this in the 50s not clocking right from the jump that was actually George Reeves, right?
And also in the 50s, what did they have, like an 8-inch or a 9-inch Philco? So we've spoken about this, that things that we pick up on right now, like in season 1, the Czar of the Underworld or whatever it was, you can. I know who that guy is, right? But in the 1950s, when you had like a 9-inch TV screen, you couldn't pick up on these things.
Yeah, I mean, we're watching these either digitally or on DVD on big flat screen televisions. We've studied and read about and watched these episodes, so we know what's coming. But if you're a kid in the 50s or a subsequent decade watching this for the first time with no context on a smaller, lower resolution television, and again, you're not expecting this. You're not expecting George Reeves in this role. I could see you being fooled by it. And the makeup, again, though, could use another pass, still changes his look and just his whole demeanor and that voice. Now, again, the voice is really over the top, but I think you want to have that contrast. It's fun. And yes, that just like that heavy Brooklyn, I'll try to do my best impression. It was like, I don't want to do, it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt. And then they ultimately convince him, right, with the promise of money in particular and all of these crimes that they're going to commit. And he goes over to the mirror and he's like, well, that's not much of a mug anyway. All right, you bought yourself a boy. What a turn of phrase, by the way. But he relents and goes along with it. But no, I love that over-the-top voice because then it shows you, especially when we get to that vocal training montage, it gives him a place to go. It's so good.
Amen. Amen. You're going to get to it in a minute, but again, a credit to Reeves because I don't want to jump too far ahead, but when he's rehearsing in front of Fairchild, or hey, we're on the 1-yard line, we're almost done, and he goes, hello, ladies and gentlemen, you could see that he hasn't fully arrived at the eloquent Superman voice, but he's close to it. You could see the evolution and how he honed it. And like you said, his coach, he's got feet of clay.
Yeah. But anyway, that's our opening scene where we have Boulder reluctant to undergo this plastic surgery to look like Superman. He's afraid it's going to hurt, but ultimately he relents and agrees to go along with this. And then we cut to the Daily Planet where we have the henchman Scratchy waiting allegedly for Perry White, and Jim comes out and he's like, oh, Perry White went home for the night. And he's like, no, he told me to wait. He's got a hole in his shoe. I fixed these things. And Jimmy's just like, all right, whatever. And he walks away. And then we see Scratchy sneak into Perry's office, conveniently unlocked, right? There was no moment of him.
Not much in terms of security.
No.
Even in the lobby. How did he get, you really get the impression it's like well after hours. It's not like, hey, it's 5:45 and there's,
right.
You get the impression maybe Perry went to that famous journalist club.
I was just going to say, I'm almost positive he is in his suite at the press club and he's ordering up his coffee and
double
sandwiches.
coffee, yeah.
He's just being ready for breaking news. But anyway, so Scratchy sneaks into Perry's office and rummages through the files and takes what we come to learn is a phonograph recording of a speech that Superman made. So a key piece of the puzzle here.
And Perry's not exactly fastidious. I mean, you looked at his desk drawers he went through. They're cruddy.
Yeah. Just, I like, and we talk about this a lot. There's so much that we don't see on this show. And so this is one little bit of business. Superman gave a speech to the city of Metropolis on the 4th of July. Not anything we'll ever see. We hear a snippet of it when Boulder's practicing, but again, just kind of filling in some of the period in between episodes. So I just kind of like that. So we're back at Fairchild's place and we have the post-op unveiling, the unwrapping of Boulder's new face. And lo and behold, it's George Reeves. And Fairchild has procured a replica of the Superman costume and hands it to him. And Boulder goes over to the mirror and he holds it up. And Fairchild makes a remark about the voice. The voice is killing me. And that's next. So we have that unveiling there. Then we're back at the Daily Planet, and Perry has noticed that someone went through his office. The only thing missing is the phonograph. He's barking at Jimmy because Jimmy's like, well, I saw this guy, but Jimmy can't describe him. He's not sure if that's actually the guy who went into the office. So Perry, again, in typical fashion, yelling at the poor kid. And Clark, very curious about why only that was stolen. No one really knows what to make of it at this point. Obviously, they don't have all of the pieces yet. And then back at the Fairchild place, we have this vocal coaching montage where they bring in Hamlet, this trainer here who did do a stint in prison, but is a great vocal coach. And you just have this whole montage of Boulder practicing sounding like Superman. So many great bits here. There's one point where Hamlet chastises him for not being cooperative, and he's just like,
And he rolls his eyes like, oh my God, I got to go through this.
Yeah.
This is Shakespeare.
I know. And then they're using the metronome at one point. It's like, I look like Superman. Why don't I sound like Superman?
And even Fairchild starts going crazy for Cocoa Puffs.
Yeah, but then as he's going, like he's starting to slip into it a little bit. It's amazing. One thing that annoys me, there's a YouTube video out there that has this scene and it's labeled as George Reeves' audition for Superman. It's like, no, that's not what this is. Like, I'm sure people in the comments have corrected that, but it bugs me that that's even out there. But anything in particular that stood out to you about this montage?
No. Probably the only thing, again, it's a credit to Reeves' ability because you could see the evolution where he gradually moved away from the very first scene, when he's got the white tie and he's looking into the mirror and he goes, okay, you got yourself a boy. You could see the evolution. And I have tremendous sympathy and appreciation because I came to realize driving over here, this must have been a lot of fun for Reeves to stretch his acting muscles. But also how confining that role was for 103 episodes where he's either Clark or he's Superman. So for someone with his abilities, this must have been very constraining. So that's why I think he had fun with this. I wish they would have done, like I said, I won't beat that to death, but his ability for light comedy was pretty good.
Your point is well taken, and it is kind of interesting because we've seen this on multiple iterations of Superman adaptations, particularly on television, but on the big screen as well. I think about something like Superman 3 with the synthetic kryptonite and Bad Superman, and he fights himself in the junkyard. But Lois and Clark and Smallville, certainly, all the instances where, for example, red kryptonite made him act weird, right? And you get to, or they switch bodies. Right, Smallville did a body swap episode. I know you don't. It's okay, Rich. It's okay. If only we were doing video. Rich gave me the most pained, confused look. I know. It's okay. It's all right.
This is not a test, Rich.
Yeah, it's not a test. I'm just telling you. It's all right.
To your listeners, Anthony really wants to play poker with me.
I know. I make a killing here. But in any event, we've had episodes where Superman, Clark switches bodies with someone else, or his personality is transformed by red kryptonite or some other device. And so I know that's not what this is here specifically, but it's still kind of in that vein of having the actor play a different take on the character. You know?
Well said.
So I know it would have been cool if we had gotten more of that. But anyway, by the end of this montage, he is sounding like Superman and, kind of, practicing his verbiage. And then Fairchild's like, all right, that's enough. He's like, we're going to get into this now. And Boulder does express concern over getting shot. And Fairchild's like, don't worry, we got that covered. And then it's at night, streets of Metropolis. We see an exterior shot, stock footage, I'm sure, of some sort. And then we're inside this little grocery store. And Boulder, dressed as Superman, walks up and says, may I have all of your money, please? Now, not to put my legal hat on here, but he did ask. He did ask, although there's a line later where Clark says, when he's speculating with Jimmy, that it is an imposter, right? And he says he traded a gun for a Superman costume, right? The idea that people would feel they couldn't say no to him, even if he's actually asking. What I love about, it's a short scene here, but what I love is that the guy says, like, do you need the money, Superman? He goes, yeah, yes. Right? When he slips out of it for a second, it was great. Like, just a little touch like that. And just how this ordinary Metropolis citizen views who he thinks is Superman. It's like, I wouldn't say he doesn't think twice. He does. He is a little hesitant and he asks for a receipt, but still it's like, oh, Superman came in, he asks, he needs the money. It's like, of course.
Yes. Yeah. Didn't a little bit later on, and it, you've got the sequence, but didn't Clark say something like, oh, it's just a publicity stunt, right?
Yeah.
Now that reminded me of the Bet a Million Butler, right? The publicity stunt. I thought he's I'm out of here, Chief.
I know. That was one of my favorite Clark outs in the Human Bomb episode. That was one of my favorite parts of that episode.
When I heard the word publicity stunt, I thought, oh, this is how Clark's going to go after the guy. He's going to leave Perry's office, another cheap publicity stunt by the Daily Planet. I won't be part of it, Chief.
I know. Well, kind of on that note, our next scene is the Daily Planet, Perry's office, with our trio here of Perry, Clark, and Jimmy. You know what I liked about this? So now all of the other papers in town, they've run the story, Superman robbed the store. And the Daily Planet is the only one who hasn't. And what I liked about this is, well, given their relationship with Superman, I appreciated the fact that they wouldn't jump the gun and run this story. They would want to dig into it, but also the tough position that puts Perry in. Because as he says, he's like, all the other papers in town are running the story. Like, we got to do something here, right? And this is where you have Clark speculating that the grocery store owner did this himself.
Right.
Right.
I remember that. Yeah.
He just made this up. He's going to go talk to him. But what I love here is how Perry and Clark are just yelling at each other and I'm borrowing a phrase from a television show that Steph and I loved on Netflix called Santa Clarita Diet with Drew Barrymore and Timothy Olyphant. It's a great show. But anyway, there's a bit in that show where the two characters are kind of like raising their voices with each other, but they're similarly aligned, and they call it heated agreement. And that's what this was here. It wasn't like they were Perry and Clark were necessarily at odds, but and the way Clark in particular is just like yelling at him was so great in heated agreement. I loved it. So Clark then goes to talk to the grocery store owner, another short scene. And I guess the key takeaway here is that the guy is really sticking to his story, that it looked and sounded like Superman, but he didn't fly. He walked away, right?
And, so and that gave Clark a degree of confidence. That drove home the fact that it is an imposter. Clark felt very confident, like, look, this is going to work itself out. Right.
Yeah, exactly. So he goes back to the Daily Planet, and he's in his office with Jimmy and relaying this conversation with the store owner. And a new bit of information that Jimmy produces is that the exact amount of money, $165, no small amount, especially back then, in particular back then, that exact amount was donated to charity. So again, this is a very baffling. It's like, why would Superman do this at all? Why would he give the money away? But it does seem to lend some credence to the idea that it is actually Superman, because why would a crook take the money and then donate it? So again, Fairchild's plan is really pretty ingenious. This scene ends with the line that I know jumped out at you, and I think we'll probably have a good laugh at it, where Jimmy again seems to be getting a little curious about all of this, and Clark is like, come on, it wasn't Superman. And Clark says, I happen to know that Superman was home in bed last night. And it just kind of fades out on that line.
Right. in this day and age, I don't think they would have used that.
Even then, though, it's like that question or that statement was begging a follow-up question from Jim.
How would you know?
How would you know? Because he's it's so definitive. Either you are him or
you're having a romantic relationship.
And I love to, it's funny, when I was first taking my notes, like kind of my process is I'll watch the episode and I'll kind of type up my notes from memory, and then I'll watch it again and I'll refine my notes. And especially when it comes to particular lines, like when I wrote it the first time, I thought he said, "I know for a fact Superman was home sleeping," but it's not that. It's I know he was in bed. So again, I feel like that, especially you and I joke about this all the time. We've joked about it on the episode, the whole business with the Kellogg's commercial, right? It couldn't be Clark and Lois at the breakfast table. What does that imply? But it's fine if it's Jimmy. It's like,
right. And also, well, maybe it would have been better if Jimmy's mother had called Superman while he was sleeping and he bit her head off.
Yeah,
because didn't she call Clark once? Look, call me back tomorrow morning.
Yeah, I'm sure he's fine.
To your audience, we're weaving in our whole plethora of all these different episodes we've seen from a standpoint of admiration.
I think I could be wrong. I get the sense our audience for this podcast, and I appreciate every single person who listens, and I always hope more folks will tune in, especially our George Reeves Adventures of Superman diehard fans who I know are out there. I think people are pretty regular listeners. I think when we get to Panic in the Sky in 2 weeks, that might be an episode that kind of pops a little bit more. You might get some more casual fans listening to that because it's such a standout, well-known episode. But as we're referencing other episodes, I think the people are with us.
I would say without doubt, and it's hard to say which. These are each so good. It's like picking your favorite child. They're both such strong stories. It's hard to say one's. To me, they're the best of the whole series. But I don't know which one I'd make number one and number two.
Yeah. All right. So now Boulder as Superman strikes again. This time at a jewelry store as the night watchman is there and just walks in and just starts taking the valuables out. But as he's leaving, the watchman goes after him and fires off a shot and does hit him. But he is, as we come to learn, he is wearing a bulletproof vest. But it still hurts. So he comes around the corner out onto the street, and Scratchy is waiting there with a camera, right, which is going to play into the furtherance of this plot, and quickly changes Boulder into civilian clothes and puts him in a car. But again, they really have all of their bases covered here with this, because the idea, as we'll come to find out, is that Scratchy takes this photo of quote unquote Superman. So now there's photographic proof, and he pretends to be this eyewitness. I saw him fly.
Correct.
Right.
Yes.
So it's really, the evidence is mounting against him. Then we're back at the Fairchild place with Boulder and Fairchild, and Boulder really kind of wants out at this point, right? He's gotten shot at. Shot.
Yeah. He shows the bullet in the back, I think, of his cape.
Yeah.
And he's appreciative, but it still hurts. It hurts, and he goes, I'm done. And
yeah, no. And Fairchild essentially says, I think two things turn Boulder around on this. One is the promise of this $2 million payday. Because Boulder's like, well, I'm keeping these jewels. And he's like, no, you're not. You're donating that to charity. Yeah. This is all part of the plan. But there's a larger score ahead.
Yeah.
This
Did you say $2 million? Even he reverts back to his Brooklyn thug, or, he's not the most sophisticated. Did you say $2 million? And he's effervescent again.
Yeah, and Fairchild promises they're not going to be shooting at him again. He's got a plan. He's got a plan for that. And Boulder also raises this question of like Superman. Like Superman's not going to stand for this. Someone out there pretending to be him. And again, Fairchild's like, don't worry, we're going to keep him busy. And that then takes us to Clark's apartment, where Jimmy shows up with the paper, right, with this photo and story about an alleged eyewitness claiming that he saw Superman fly.
I love this scene.
Go for it.
Well, all of a sudden, Clark's whole world is dismantled. I mean, he's all of a sudden, the confidence that, it's an imposter is gone. And you see Clark starting to get worried, like, I think he says something like, I don't think he walks in his sleep. But you could see in his face the anxiety and the stress. So all of a sudden, his whole world was shattered. And he starts wondering, hey, am I losing control? Am I sleepwalking? Am I doing things that could hurt people and being absolutely unaware of it? So the stress on his face, I was appreciative of.
100%. And I love the turns in this scene, because initially, when he first brings up this idea of sleepwalking, I think when he's at the door with Jimmy, and it's just kind of this flip thing where he's like, "Oh, come on, Jimmy, he doesn't sleepwalk. At least I don't think he does, huh?" But then after he sees the photo and this bit about the eyewitness, and he sits down and he's like, I don't think he does.
Yeah, that's exactly. He says something like, I don't think he walks in his sleep, but he's so perplexed.
And it makes sense, because especially in this world, the story would still work today, even if you were talking about the DCU that's populated by other characters, but especially in this world where he's the only one. If someone who looks and sounds and dresses like him is actually flying, it stands to reason it could only be him. Again, unless this is all a very carefully orchestrated ruse. But again, it's really shaking his confidence and his belief. It was so good.
It's so well done. That is such a there's two scenes here, and we're going to get to the other one in a couple of seconds. But this one scene where he looks at the paper, and then his whole world has been shattered, and you could see the doubt and how perplexed he is. Now, I'm going to go down a rabbit hole for a second. This TV show, this episode we're reviewing, apparently there was a radio show that said, is there another Superman? And parts of what we're discussing right now are absolutely included in that radio episode. Now, I haven't listened to it. Batman guest stars quite a bit. It's like 14 episodes, and you know what they're like. At like 20 minutes a pop. I just don't have. I mean, if I drive up to Rochester or something, okay, I'll listen to it. But the fact that the elements are the same, and Superman started having doubts. Batman initially concluded, well, there must be another Kryptonian on Earth. So I'd like to get into it, but it's a big commitment, because I think it's close to 3 hours.
I hear you. And periodically we do have listeners reach out to say, oh, this episode was adapted from the radio show or something similar. And I appreciate people letting me know. It's not that, because I know we rarely talk about it per se, unless an instance like this where you bring it up. It's not that I'm totally unaware or I don't care. It's just that, I don't know, the radio show is its own thing. And again, that's kind of a rabbit hole that I'll probably go down at some point, probably not on this podcast, but probably on my other one at some point. I don't know. But for the record, I am aware that there's, kind of the shared DNA, and that there's a lot that they're taking their cue from the radio show. One of the other things that we've kind of circled around on, this idea that whether how specifically or how literally is kind of an open question, but that perhaps we should look at that radio show as when there are maybe continuity gaps or whatnot on the TV show, kind of looking to the radio show to maybe fill in some of those gaps. And maybe that was the intention. Like, people know these stories from the radio show, and you can kind of fill that in when there are things where, especially when we talked about kryptonite recently, it's like, has he encountered kryptonite before? It was a little ambiguous in the defeat of Superman. It's like, well, I don't know. He's had all these radio experiences with them. Maybe that's kind of what they figured people had in their heads.
And to your point, Candy Myers was very prominent in the radio series. I mean, there were episodes where he was the title character, right? So there is an overlap. And there likewise, I know there's others. I think there was 30 comic book stories that were synced up with the TV show. So there is a lot overlap between media. But I think it was the same thing where in the radio, from the synopsis, there's definite elements from the radio show in this story, but they're not identical. The stories, but also the whole thing that Superman might be losing his grip on reality is intrinsically part of it.
Gotcha. Fat Moose Comics is New Jersey's best and oldest comic book store. Established in 1982 and under new ownership since 2020, Moose sells a wide selection of comics from every publisher and time period, along with action figures, graphic novels, posters, statues, and more. If you're looking for something and they don't have it, they can probably get it for you. They know a guy. Visit Fat Moose in Whippany the next time you're in the Garden State, and be sure to reach out via the Fat Moose Comics Facebook page. Filmmakers and movie fans alike should be sure to attend these film festivals: Brightside Tavern in Jersey City, Hang On to Your Shorts in Asbury Park, Point Lookout on Long Island, and Round Reel in Bloomfield, New Jersey. Take it from an alum of 2 of them. Submission information for filmmakers, as well as details about the festivals, can be found at filmfreeway.com. Follow the festivals on social media for news about events, discounts, tickets, and more. Also, listen to the Hang On to Your Shorts and Cullen on Film podcasts, available via a shared universe network. This episode made possible in part by educator, hobby comic book collector, and pop culture enthusiast Sam Lim. Sam is based in the South Jersey area and is looking to connect with other comics fans as well as retailers. They're also looking for comic shops to explore, so recommendations are welcome. Be sure to follow Sam on Instagram at SZL Comics to see their latest comic pickups and shop adventures. So we then follow Jimmy to Scratchy's place, this alleged witness. And if there's any part of this episode that's kind of like, all right, it was this. It was interesting. What I did like about this was how Jimmy, it takes him a minute, but he does place this guy as the man who was outside Perry's office.
And what does that say about how dumb Scratchy is?
Well, yeah, I know. Although to the show and Scratchy's credit, after Scratchy knocks out Jimmy and binds and gags him, and they're sitting there and he's on the phone with Fairchild, he says, like, I told you I shouldn't have been the one to pretend to be the witness.
Oh, I forgot about that.
Yeah, so I give them credit for that. I don't know. I know Jimmy's not much of a fighter, although when we had the Man Who Could Read Minds episode early on with the Phantom Burglar, I don't know if you remember that one, but early in that episode, Jimmy like has a very like physical tussle with this burglar, so he can mix it up. All that to say, I feel like Jimmy could have taken this guy.
I agree. I mean,
or
I
at
think
least
Jimmy
put up more of a fight.
Yeah, Jimmy had a little more weight to his advantage.
Yeah, he could have, because when he realizes this is the guy, and the guy realizes that he had seen Jimmy at the Planet, Jimmy just runs, and the guy chases him around the corner and just knocks him out.
Yeah,
but I feel like Jimmy could have taken him. So maybe just a larger, more imposing Scratchy would have sold this a little bit more. I don't know. I'm getting a little nitpicky here, but that's all. So in any event, Jimmy now has been taken. Then we get to, I love this scene in Perry's office between Perry and Boulder as Superman. This was so good because you have, quote unquote, Superman handing Perry the jewels, the diamonds that were stolen, and commanding Perry to give them to charity. And we talk all the time about how overly gruff and sometimes one note this version of Perry White can be. But I feel like one of the huge exceptions to that, and we've hit on this in other episodes, is when he's talking to Superman. There is a level of respect that you don't typically see as he's barking orders to everyone else. I mean, he's really like
compassionate,
calm and kind and compassionate to Superman. He's like Superman, like, you've always worked with the police. Like, what are you doing? You know?
Yeah. This reminded me of that one scene in the wrestling episode where Perry kind of has a fatherly talk with Clark, and he's not the strident, angry curmudgeon. He's kind of compassionate. Yeah, so it reminded me of that thing when he was talking to Clark going, come on, Clark, this isn't some degree of jealousy with that Winchester. Here, I was very impressed with his tone and his concern and his support for Superman, where he was really going, Superman, this is not you. You know, what's going on? Now, I also was very impressed with how Boulder turned it around real fast and goes, have you ever considered the consequences if I were to get angry at Metropolis? And all of a sudden, you see Superman as a menace.
Yeah.
And Boulder was so assertive and basically put this menacing fear, you know, like, look, you better tell Metropolis to be careful because they better think long and hard about what would happen if I got angry at them.
Yeah. No, I loved that turn. And also because it gets at this larger idea, and we've seen more modern stories delve into this specifically, but about, again, like how the world would receive this kind of character. And on this show, it's, again, not designed for that. But just to kind of even touch on this idea of, well, you know, we've kind of all accepted Superman and he's been this trusted champion and protector, but like what happens if that changes?
Yeah.
Or there's at least the threat of that.
This 20 or 30 seconds struck me as the Injustice Superman.
Yeah, and the payoff to this is, as we'll come to learn from these subsequent scenes, especially when we get to the scene with Henderson and then the actual bank robbery, is that now the order has been given to just stand down. Just let Superman do this. Because again, the threat of, hey, you don't know what I'll do if I get angry. It's like, oh, okay. And really, what recourse do they have? So it was really fascinating. And then the cherry on top to the scene is when Boulder leaves the office and he's like, I'm shaking like a leaf.
Right. Which
it was such a great little touch. They they didn't need that, but it was such a great touch.
It added so much. Yep. I mean, here he's bluffing. And there's no easy way out. You're up in the elevator, you're in Perry's office. It's broad daylight. So the fact that he goes, oh, shaking like a leaf, that's a very human response.
I know. They could have done, I know I'm rewriting this, but they could have done something where he grabs a pair of glasses at some point or something, something like that. And they're like, oh, Clark. I mean, then that puts a whole other spin on this episode and you get into the secret identity business. But again, like I keep saying, they could have brought Boulder back with this face. I think there was more that they could do here. But yeah, I'm shaking like a leaf thing was great. So now we have this scene that, again, as you had found in your research, that apparently was not part of the original script that was added, where we have Clark and his doctor and good friend, as we're told. They both acknowledge the fact that they're friends, Tom. Now, Gary Grossman's book, Serial to Serial, identified this doctor as a psychiatrist. What kind of doctor did you take him to be?
I likewise assumed he was a psychiatrist or a psychologist. But there's early indications where Tom, and we never learn his last name.
Just Tom.
And I want to come back to something, but he speaks about the physiology and his physical stuff. And, your reflexes are fine. So he looked at it from a physical standpoint, but I kind of had the vibe he was more of a psychologist.
I never want to doubt the great Gary Grossman, but the only thing about it is that not only do they have this personal relationship, but again, it seems like he has regularly treated Clark. And does Clark go to a psychologist or psychiatrist regularly?
That's a good point.
It'd be fascinating if he does. I mean, that's a whole other thing.
I never thought about that.
Again, watching it, it seemed to me like this was just his doctor, like the doctor that the planet makes him go to get his physical, right? Like going back to the stolen costume. Like, why wasn't he wearing his costume? Well, because it was physical day and he had to go into the office. And also, to your point, the fact that, here's the thing, if he's a psychiatrist, he ain't a great one.
Well, you read my mind. That was my punchline. Like, at one point, he goes, okay, you might get these crazy ideas. I don't think a psychologist, they...
Yeah, you're not supposed to say that. But also, you brought this up too, but we're like, Clark's having all these fears, like, what if I'm doing this in my sleep? And he's like, oh, your reflexes are great. Don't worry about it. What is that?
Right. That's apples and oranges.
Or that's just his strategy. You know what? Maybe that's just his strategy as a psychiatrist, right? Like, you just want to get people out of their heads and off thinking about the problem, which maybe can make it work. So it's just like, no, your reflexes are fine. Like, you're good.
Right. Yeah. Your reflexes are fine. Physically, you're in great shape, right? Maybe you should take a few days off. Take a few days off and get some rest. Why? Look, Clark, you've got this crazy idea. Now you think I'm crazy.
When he says, so, Clark really keeps pushing this. Like, is it possible? And finally he's like, yeah, I mean, it's possible. And he says, like, you've been working too hard. You should take a vacation.
Oh, are you saying
when Clark jumps up, he's like, so there is something wrong. And he's like, no, it's just these crazy ideas. I don't know that we've ever seen that color on Clark. We've seen him annoyed a lot.
Oh, the Miss Backrack.
We've seen him annoyed, frustrated, impatient, episode after episode. But he was genuinely worried here.
Which was impressive.
Yeah.
I would love to know how much George Reeves collaborated with the directors. Because, there's other anecdotal stories, and I'm going to shift to different things, but like the movie The Untouchables, right? That scene where Kevin Costner and Sean Connery have that discussion, and he goes, what are you prepared to do, and all this stuff. Well, originally that was going to be out on the street. And Sean Connery said, you know what? It would be better if we did this in a church. So here's a situation where the actor's thinking about what his character would do. So Connery said that. And then there's other stories about like The Fugitive with Harrison Ford and Tommy Lee Jones. They rehearsed that scene where before Harrison Ford jumps into the water, right? They narrowed it down. They cut it down to make it real powerful. You know, I didn't kill my wife. I don't care. So I wonder if Clark said some of these things like, look, here's how I think. I wonder how much it was developed as they were doing the filming.
You know, that's a great question. And it's, especially in recent years, I mean, we've always had actors and writers and directors giving interviews talking about the process, but especially in recent years with podcasts in particular, you know, we've had a lot of people talking about the process in such an in-depth way that maybe you haven't had as much before. And I feel like one of the things that does come up a lot when you're talking about direction, you know, I think in a lot of instances, especially when you're talking about an ongoing television series where these actors know the characters better than any director who's going to come on. They play them every week. So I would venture to guess a lot of the direction that would have been given here wouldn't have been so much on that performance aspect, right? I feel like a lot of that probably did come from George. I mean, I could be wrong, but
that's what I'm surmising.
Going back to when we were talking about other instances in Superman media of this kind of thing, of the character behaving differently. The episode of Smallville that I was referencing is called Transference. It's from season 4, where Lionel Luthor, Lex's father, and Clark switch bodies. And so you have Lionel Luthor, evil Lionel Luthor in Clark's body pretending to be Clark. And there's this great moment in the Kent house where Jonathan pats, quote unquote, Clark on the back, as he normally does, like just kind of a fatherly affection. And they've recently talked about this on the Talkville Rewatch podcast that Tom Welling and Michael Rosenbaum do, where Tom Welling took it upon himself. His response was to very, very sarcastically pat Jonathan on the back. Because again, it says Lionel in Clark's body. He's like, well, okay. And it's great. Like, it just brings that scene to life. So no, I mean, I like to think, I would imagine a lot of this came from George here. But it's such an effective scene. And he's
and the fact that it wasn't part of the original script.
Yeah, I gotta dig into that a little bit more. And if anyone else out there knows more about this, please reach out and let us know.
I was speculating that could something have happened with Lois? Could she have been sick or not available that day? And hey, you know what? We need another minute and a half, because I think it's the most powerful scene of the whole episode.
Yeah, because
I take that back.
No, but your point is well taken. And I'm trying to just thinking about this in the moment, but there is something to be said when we have Candy, for example, in the stolen costume, or Dr. Tom in this episode. It's not like Clark goes so far as revealing his identity to them, but there is a different level of letting down his guard than you see with Perry, with Lois, with Jimmy.
Absolutely. Well said.
It's its own little pocket.
And if I could expand on that, we saw that same thing with Double Trouble with his friend Colonel Redding.
Yeah. Right?
Where there's, or even that what was that other episode with Gary Allen, right? Who was affected.
Yeah, that's coming down. We'll get there at some point.
But there was, I don't want to say professional respect, but there was respect between, Clark and Gary Allen, Clark and Colonel Redding, Clark and Tom. And it's impressive.
Well, because here's the thing, like with the Daily Planet crew, and again, but also just as a side note, we've talked about this before. We were never given any indication, like what happens to Ma? We see her at the end of, or, early on in Superman on Earth, she gives him the costume. I don't know that she's ever referenced. We never see her again. But, this is a sort of episode where, oh man, it would have been interesting, to kind of, maybe she's the one he could talk to. Anyway, but with Lois, with Perry, with Jimmy, right, it's this kind of big brother, little brother dynamic. With Lois, again, their relationship isn't necessarily one where they would be having these kind of heart-to-hearts necessarily. And Perry, again, like we said, he can shift into that more fatherly mode at times, but still most of it is just kind of them yelling at each other.
Yeah. The gruff, impatient curmudgeon.
Yeah, so there's just this whole other angle that they can tap into here. Speaking of Perry, so after the doctor, Clark goes back to Perry's office, and this is there's a beat in here that's one of my absolute favorites of this entire episode. But again, still talking about how could this possibly be? And Clark is adamant it's not really Superman doing this, but Perry now seemingly has had proof. He had the guy standing right in front of him. And Perry's like, how do you know? Are you Superman? But then Perry talks about how the guy was just here a half hour ago when Clark, of course, was with Dr. Tom. So now this isn't a matter of this is happening at night when I'm sleeping. I could be sleepwalking. Now he knows. And
he's
the
so
turn
happy.
is so fast. He goes, that's all. The that's all is maybe my favorite single beat of this entire episode. Because it's so
powerful,
fast and powerful. And the relief that clearly
Yes.
washes over him. That's all. And he's gone. And he even says, I've wasted enough time already.
I agree. I mean, and again, kudos to George Reeves. I mean, with that one face, all of a sudden his confidence is back. He's got urgency. And we'll come back to this in Henderson's office. But he's almost relieved. Like, hey, there's the answer. I'm not going crazy. And I know what needs to be done.
Yeah. Well, speaking of Henderson, so now Superman, the real Superman, goes to Henderson's office. This was probably the funniest scene of the entire thing.
I couldn't agree more.
And what's great about this is Henderson's reaction is totally believable. Because again, as far as everyone's concerned, Superman's kind of lost it, right? The real Superman is not helping his case because he's overeager at this point. He's figured out it's an imposter. He's relieved. He wants to get to the bottom of this. He's coming on a little strong.
A little strong. I mean, well, you do it better. But Henderson running around the desk, trying to keep the desk between him and Superman. Now we've gotten along, old friend, And,
I know.
Yeah, and then finally, when Superman grabs Henderson, he doesn't help himself, but he goes, "Come on, Bill. I don't want to make you a volleyball in your own office."
I know that whole thing where Henderson keeps backing away, and essentially you have Superman chasing him around the desk. And he's like, "I'm the real Superman." He's like, "I know, and I've always admired you too." Just trying to placate him. And then, yes, to your point, when he grabs Henderson, he's like, "Listen, look, Bill, we've been friends for years. I hate to use you as a volleyball in your own office." What the hell other version of Superman out there across media would say or do anything like this? Why I love this show so much.
I laughed out loud. And I watched this episode 3 times to prepare for this, to pick up all the nuances. And again, my love with what he did as the character of Boulder. But when he grabs Henderson by the lapels and goes, "Look, Bill, we've been friends for a long time. I'd hate to use you as a volleyball in your own office," right? Talk about the menacing Superman. Now, I will say, far less nuanced than, "Hey, I got a cabin in the mountains I want to take you to."
Sure.
Right? But very reminiscent of the impatience with Miss Backrack.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. This is maybe something we'll circle back to in more depth in another episode. But as we get deeper into talking about all these episodes, the way that we do, I think one of the things that's so interesting to me is I think that this version of Superman, it really occupies such a unique, distinct place when we look at adaptations of the character, because I think there's, especially because so many viewers in that initial decade when it aired and in the subsequent decades as the reruns ran, who watched as kids. And I think there's a paternal sense that a lot of those viewers who watched as kids kind of ascribe to Superman in a way that I don't think people necessarily look at the Dean Cain or the Tom Welling or the Tyler Hoechlin or the Henry Cavill or even Christopher Reeve. I don't know. I could be wrong on that. But even then, I think there's this kind of paternal view that is almost uniquely George's.
Amen.
And hand in hand with that, there's been no other version of the character as frustrated and impatient, endearingly so, but who kind of taps into that into that feeling the way this one does. It's because when we look at the versions, I mean, they all have something that makes them distinct, but then there's also the kind of unifying qualities as well. But that kind of impatient frustration is so specific.
Right. I agree with you. As you were speaking, I reflected. Now, I've never really watched the Dean Cain. I think physically he would be a great Superman.
The show is great, actually, in its own way.
And from some limited, I've come to appreciate Tom Welling, Christopher Reeve. But George Reeves, there is this urgency and this purpose. And look, I'm not going to waste my time. I'm not going to be thoughtful and patient. If I got to knock the door down, I'm going to knock the door down.
And that's why I think going back a few years ago to those episodes of Digging for Kryptonite that you and I did when I first binged a lot of Adventures of Superman, I think there was a lot that resonated with me. But if I really, really had to pick one thing, I think it, not just, that he gets annoyed, but just that, again, that urgency, that energy.
That purpose.
Purpose really just so stood out to me.
This, again, harkens back to one of my favorite episodes from season 1, The Broken Statues, where Clark is pushing around two thugs. I mean, I've always loved George Reeves because, as I've said, he is not the milquetoast, embarrassed, nebbish. Clark is the real deal, and Superman's just an extension of Clark.
And when we had Mike Carlin on a few episodes ago to talk about Jet Ace, he talked about how George Reeves and his depiction of Superman was very specifically an influence on the Triangle era creators. They talked about it. Yeah. Clearly Rich hasn't listened to the episode. It's all right. But in any event, so we leave the scene with Henderson. Now there's been this report about this robbery of the gold at the Metropolis Bank. And so they both rush off. Now, how does Henderson get to the bank before Superman?
I've wondered about that too.
Because we get to the next scene and he's there talking to Hamlet, the vocal coach, who's pretending that he saw Superman go off this way. And when Superman shows up and Hamlet just faints, he recognizes this was just a decoy witness. And they're trying to throw them off.
How did, talk about a goof, right?
I know. So now we're really in our climax here. We have Fairchild and a bound Jimmy in the getaway truck. And then Boulder shows up in his vehicle and they start transferring the gold bars into the getaway truck. And when they've wrapped up that bit of business, Boulder gets into the back of the, we got to get him out of sight. And then Superman has found them and shows up and lands. And it's an interesting interplay here because Fairchild thinks it's just Boulder. Right. And you see Fairchild's true colors come out because he's like, we already, Scratchy and Hamlet are left behind. Like this could just be up. But then as Superman keeps pushing, he's like, all right,
I was going to do this later.
And he says, you were always worried about getting shot and, we had the vest here, but what if you got shot in the face? Well, you're about to find out. And he starts firing. Of course, Superman just smiles as the bullets have no effect. They're really, you see nothing.
You see nothing.
You see nothing. Yeah. Question for you. What happens to incapacitate Fairchild? What was your read on that?
I got to tell you that. And Anthony, there were times when I was younger and I'd watch these episodes. I just go through it real fast. But to watch it carefully, what the hell with that face plant, right? I mean, he just turns around, falls down, and he blacks out.
I mean, it's like...
And it was so unathletic and so, discombobulated.
This is where we wanted season 1 Superman, because he would have just punched him in the face, but we're in season 2, so he can't do that. So instead, it's like, I watched it a few times, and it's like he turns, and I think his shoulder hits the door of the truck, not enough to knock him out, but then he doesn't hit his head on the rock. It's almost like a cross between the force of hitting his shoulder, but then he's also, maybe there's a fainting element. I don't know. It's very awkwardly staged.
And Hamlet fainted earlier.
Yeah.
So
I don't know, but somehow Fairchild is unconscious. But meanwhile, as he was firing at Superman, bullets were hitting the truck and hit the fuel line and the fire erupts. And we get super breath.
Yes.
He uses the super breath and then opens the door, removes Jimmy. And then, of course, we have...
the Superman fight, so to speak.
Yes.
But wasn't there something like Boulder's running away or the stuntman is running away, right?
Yes, a very obvious stuntman.
Right. We go very obvious stuntman is running away. But Superman does something like he's going to throw something. Like he lines up. And what was the purpose of that?
Oh, I don't know.
He did hold his hand that's the way he's going. And then Superman kind of jumped him and threw him down.
I know. It would have made sense if this maybe would have been too violent, but thrown a rock or a stick or something at him. You know what I mean? He's getting the angle and then he just chucks something at him. But I don't know. But this guy is down. The very obvious stuntman. Again, people watching this in the 50s, tiny black and white television.
Yeah, 8-inch or 9-inch diagonal Philco.
It's fine. I still think they could have maybe gotten someone who looked a little bit closer. I mean, it really...
Well, I agree, but these guys were so cheap and so frugal. I mean, they were just pumping them out.
Fair enough. And then we get the final scene here, which we talked about before, where you have Henderson with Boulder in the hospital bed, right? And this bit about wanting his own face back, and it takes more than a face and a voice to be Superman, and then the pan across to Clark and Jimmy, affirming that. I mean, I said it at the top, so I've already given away my rating, but this is an easy 5 fedoras for me. For you,
amen.
As well?
Definitely.
This was so good,
and I'm conflicted. Depending upon when you speak to me, there's no way I can say I still have to watch Panic in the Sky, but I've watched it before, and I love it. It's tremendously hard. These two are in a category. They're the best of the series.
I agree, and we can just enjoy them both, and that's fine. And for anyone who Panic in the Sky is their favorite, great. If this is their favorite, great. Or any other episode, it's all good. I guess, though, I'm glad we had this conversation about, is this actually the best? Because I do think, like I said, generally speaking, people aren't in agreement about much, but people generally tend to feel Panic in the Sky is the best. And all I want to say is just that, hey, there's a case to be made for this one. Like, this one is absolutely tremendous. It's a ton of fun. If you haven't watched it or watched it in a while, cue it up. It's really an absolute blast. And I enjoy all of these discussions that we do with all of the guests. At the same time, it's always particularly fun when it's an episode that I love and that I can speak about with this kind of enthusiasm. And so I've just had the best time, and I thank you for coming along. And I'm excited to have you back soon for Panic in the Sky.
I'm looking forward to it.
All right.
I'm looking forward.
Folks, we will be back in 2 weeks. We're off next week for the 4th of July holiday. So we'll be back in 2 weeks with The Man in the Lead Mask. And then the week after that, Rich Roney will return for Panic in the Sky. Until then, as always, remember, only Superman can do super things. Be sure to check out our sister podcast series, Digging for Kryptonite, a Superman fan journey, a weekly exploration of Superman's vast 85-year mythology, available wherever you get podcasts. Please join us on social media, become a patron, and subscribe, rate, and review today. Links are in the show notes. Thank you all.